This is Black Girls Politickin. I'm Michaela. Today we are joined by one of the Democratic Party's most respected political strategists and organizers. She has spent decades at the center of national campaigns, advising candidates, shaping strategy, and working with individuals like former Vice President Kamala Harris and former Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Ashley, I am so excited to welcome you to an episode of Politicking with.
Thanks for having me. And I'm so excited that you have this podcast and this platform and that you title it Black Girls in Politics. So I'm
Yes.
excited to talk to you, excited to hear about your journey as well in this business and to figure out, listen, how can we leverage what we know to be beneficial to your audience and Black folks as we move into another election season. So thanks for having
Absolutely, of course. So you wrote this op-ed. I want to go straight into this opinion piece
me.
that you wrote because it was so good. I've shared it with my groups, with, the young women that work on my team, with the
Right.
Black women that I know that aren't specifically in politics but are still adjacent. And the op-ed is entitled "The Party We Built, the Bill Has Come Due." I mean, what a title, first and
Thank
foremost.
you.
Like, let's get into that. I want to know all of the nitty-gritty details. How did you get to the point of writing this piece? And what was that process like?
Oh, that's such a good question. I got to the point of writing this piece because I felt like I know what I know, and I know a lot about how the inside of the Democratic Party works. And I've known for some time, that what people would say on the outside that the party takes for us for granted. I used to always reject that notion. And as I slowly moved outside of the walls of the party and started to do television and be an independent person, not paid
Mhm.
by an elected official of the Democratic Party, I started to see the party very differently. And to be honest with you, it wasn't until after the Voting Rights Act got dismantled that I felt like that I was no longer going to be party to apologizing for, white mediocrity. I was no longer going to be apologizing for what Black people are or have earned and deserve, that I was not going to be the person who was going to sit by silently and watch the party not just take us for granted, what I think is show a level of disrespect and resentment toward Black people that is counterproductive. And so that's really the impetus behind me writing this piece. I felt like I had, enough was enough, if that makes any sense. And that now is a time for us to lean in. Everything is being exposed in the last 2 years, and I think the Democratic Party putting out their autopsy is part of that exposure. And it's our responsibility, mine in particular, to really call a spade and really, explain to people what's actually happening with inside the party and how it affects Black political power and economic power.
Yeah. Now, I want to ask this question because I think it's at the top of mind for a lot of people. I think traditionally, I'll say for myself growing up, right, we've learned a lot about two-party politics, right? You have what people would consider a good guy, a bad guy. We've always seen the Democratic Party as what we would consider the good guys, right? The people that are fighting for you, the ones, the party of the working families, the party of equality and equity, right? But how do people, specifically Black and brown individuals, and I'll go even deeper and say, Black women, people that are considered the backbone of this party, how do we contend with that they see us as the backbone, but won't necessarily invest in the backbone of this democracy?
Yeah, I mean, that's another good question. And it was really the impetus for me writing this op-ed is not just knowing what I know about the Democratic Party, but hearing Black women say that quiet thing out loud now. It was Houston Chronicle interview recently. Black women, and one woman in particular said that we give 92% to this party and we get nothing in return. So I'm thinking to myself, finally, someone is saying the quiet thing out loud. And if it is a woman who's not political,
Mhm.
that means everybody can see it, right? That means everybody's fully aware of the dynamic that actually exists. Then there was a most recent poll that showed that 35% of Black women in particular don't trust either party, don't think that either party represents their interest. And for me, that's a problem because we know Black women are not just a constituency, they're a force multiplier in our communities. Secondarily, Project 2025 was rooted in undermining undermining the interest of Black women. You know, my pastor says this all the time, that the devil comes for, the enemy comes for the source first. And so when the Republicans designed their Project 2025, the first on their list was to attack and undermine the power and the economic power of Black women. And that has been happening to a record degree. And it led me to sort of ask myself, who's protecting Black women?
Mm,
Who is protecting our interests? I remember when, you know, we were inching up 300,000 Black women losing their jobs, 400,000 Black women losing their job over the last year and a half. And I called the Democratic Party and I said, well, what have you guys said about this?
mm,
And they said the chairman has said nothing about it. You know, they sent me to the Black guy who was running Black media, and he made a statement. But my point was, Black women are the backbone of this party. The whole thing rides on our back. And for you not to even acknowledge that we're suffering in this moment, that we're being hit economically harder than any other group in the country, to me was a dereliction of duty and responsibility and a violation of that covenant that we have with the Democratic Party.
mhm.
And so I felt like, listen, now in this moment with everything on the line and given everything that we've lost, we have to finally hold this party accountable to the interest of Black people, and especially Black women who've given this party everything and have
Absolutely.
asked very little in return. Honestly, we've asked very little in return, and we get even less. And so that, you know, is sort of one of my main focuses was, you know, is really protecting the interests and carrying the interests of Black women, and calling out anyone who runs interference on that, and even if it is the Democratic Party. So to your point about the two-party system, the loyalty, you know, all of that is true, and it is true for good reason. But we perfected that party. Everything that you just named is, again, on our backs. We
Yeah.
fought hard to make that party reflect those interests. So my point is, if you are a party, which you just said, a party of DEI and equity, then why is it we're not getting our fair share of resources?
Oh,
Why is it that we're not getting our fair share of investment? Someone's going to have to explain that to me. So I stepped out on faith and by myself to really call out the party on where it's making its investments. Now, if we can get into the op-ed a little bit,
yeah.
the Democratic autopsy found that the party spends about $8 billion across its entire ecosystem. Now, when I'm saying the ecosystem, I'm including the presidential campaign, the congressional campaigns, the senatorial campaign, everyone who's a Democrat that is running. There's a total of about $8 billion that's spent. Of the $8 billion, and this is again according to their autopsy, approximately 1% of that money, I'm going to say it again, approximately 1% of that money is invested in Black voters. So what I say in my op-ed is, we're at the point to now where I think we should reevaluate this relationship and this dynamic. I
Mhm.
mean, if it was your boyfriend, you leave him, you know what I mean? And so here we are, cycle after cycle, delivering critical races for the Democratic Party, and in return, we're not being invested in. We should see every one of those dollars that runs through the ecosystem as an opportunity to invest in Black infrastructure on the ground in Texas,
Mhm.
Georgia, Mississippi,
Yeah.
Ohio, pick it, choose it, all around the country. And when I say the Black infrastructure, I'm talking about what you talked about a little earlier, the organizing,
Yeah.
the Black firms to engage Black voters. Why are there not enough Black firms talking to Black voters? Why are there white firms talking to Black voters? That we need to invest in new media platforms like yours and others that are actually engaging Black voters at a time in which Black media is old form of media, newspapers are dwindling and disappearing. So that's how we have to see those dollars, as an opportunity to invest in building that Black infrastructure to achieve Black political power on the ground that can be leveraged not just to elect some white guy to the Senate, but leverage for our own purposes. And so that is the sort of the premise of my piece. I offer what I think are a couple of sound suggestions or recommendations or demands, I should say, that I think we should be demanding. One is that the money be made equitable. The Congressional Black Caucus not too long ago sent a letter to these corporations inquiring about their DEI practices. My point was, rightfully you should do that, but you should send it to the Democratic National Committee.
Hmm.
Why should you do that? Is because if Target fails, I can go get my toilet paper anywhere.
Yeah.
But when the Democratic Party fails, I got 7.5% unemployment. Our voting rights is dismantled. 400 years of Black progress is rolled back. I mean, the Democratic Party has an outsized influence on our ability to live freely and thrive in this nation in a way that no other corporation actually does.
Yeah.
And so that is what we really have to confront, is that a party that says it's equitable and it's for DEI actually is not when it comes to us. Secondly, I suggest we should demand power sharing. So anywhere where Black votes are critical, you're in Texas, my home state of Texas, where you're going to need Black voters, then you need to have a Black person at the table with budgetary authority. Not this representation matters. Absolutely not. Authority, budget authority matters.
Absolutely.
And then the third one I say is, we got enough resources and wealth in our own community. We should reinvest in ourselves and be more inward facing in this moment, and launch a Black innovation lab, is what I called it, where we really do the work that the Democratic Party is not going to do right now, which is understanding our voters, coming up with a Black agenda, coming up with a new playbook on how to engage and mobilize Black voters. So that's the extent of the op-ed. It gets a little spicy, in terms of the
Yes.
language,
Yeah.
but I think it is because I've been pushed to the edge, as have Black people.
Yeah. I mean, and really, like all Black people, I think even more so Black women, again, we have seen time and time again qualified Black women that have not been given a chance. But even on the other side of that, which I think a lot of people do not get this peek behind the curtain, right? They don't see what's taking place at the tables. They don't see the conversations that's being had. And so realistically, there are a lot of individuals that don't fully understand, right? The reason why, political strategists, individuals like yourself are now speaking out. And a lot of them think it's based off of one election cycle, and it is not, right? It is
Absolutely
not
not.
at all. And so I love receipts. You said that the op-ed got a little spicy. I'm a keeper of receipts. We've seen this time and time again, right? We saw this effort with Congressman Jim Clyburn with Black voters in South Carolina in 2020. We've seen the organization efforts of women like Stacey Abrams in Georgia, flipping Georgia, right? And so a lot of individuals are wondering or asking themselves, what is the benefit, right, to doing this work, to organizing, to mobilizing? We're telling people, get people registered to vote, but feeling as if we are good enough to do the work, but not necessarily to lead. What do you tell people, and what does this op-ed tell people about that sentiment that individuals in this space may have?
Well, my point is that we have all the power in the dynamic.
Hmm.
You look at a state like Texas, you can't win without Black voters. You look at a state like Georgia, Georgia actually is a North Star. What once was a red state is now a purple, if not lean blue state. And it's primarily because of what I'm suggesting the party needs to do. That Stacey Abrams led an initiative to invest in Black voters and go, she went to rural Georgia and found every Black voter possible and brought them to the table and engaged them. And she engaged them in between time. So in between each election, year round investment. And that's what I argue we need to do, because Georgia is a North Star. But what I say is that we need to realize our own power in this dynamic. The party doesn't function or move without us.
Yeah.
So if you're feeling, just like in any other dynamic, if you're feeling used and you're not feeling fully appreciated, what do you do about it? You either up and leave, you
Yeah.
either make demands, right? Understanding what value you add to any entity, you either, you leave, or you either make demands. And my point is, we can't leave, because where are we going to go?
Hmm.
But we definitely have room to make demands. And, the Democratic Party put out this document, the autopsy. So now we know what we didn't know before. Now people, are talking about, or are now aware that the Democratic Party is not just a political party, but it's a business. It's an $8 billion business. It's one of the most profitable businesses in the nation, but they have to understand the implications of the party's decisions on their own lives. So we've got all the power in the dynamic, and the question is, what are we going to do about it?
Hmm.
I offer three suggestions that we need to do, three demands, and it's incumbent upon us and Black leadership to lean in this moment, to say, absolutely, there's something inherently unfair about this system that's set up, that it's a racket that is really riding on the backs of Black people, and and Black suffering and despair. And so we just have to really understand that, again, the party doesn't move without us. And for that reason, that we've got all the leverage in the dynamic. I mean, we've got this moral authority in this nation that no other people have,
Mhm.
that we can leverage to our advantage. But it just takes courage to do it. I'm trying to figure out, why am I the only one saying this? You
Yes,
know what I mean?
now
Like,
that's it right there. Yes.
exactly, it's catching fire, but like, why am I still standing alone in this
Yes.
fight? Like, I can name you, 60 plus people, starting with the CBC, that should be leaning in on this issue, that should find
Absolutely.
it equally as appalling as I have. So that's what I would say, is that you only stay in the labor category if you choose to. You
Absolutely.
only stay on the plantation if you choose to. What did
Absolutely.
Harriet say? This is not my life. This is not for me. I am
Yes.
not supposed to be a slave. So what did
Yes.
she do? She got up and left.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
She understood her power. She came back for more and released more.
Mhm.
That's an understanding of your own power and the courage to lean into your own power.
Absolutely.
So this is what's running through our veins. That is what's running through our veins. I got a bust of Harriet Tubman that sits in my office to remind me of how much power we have and what we're capable of, if we see ourselves not as the labor but as the leader.
I
And
love
so
that.
that's, those are some of my thoughts.
I love that. And I want to dig into this a little bit more. So, and I'm going to directly quote. You say the moment calls for a Black Innovation Lab, a well-resourced initiative that brings together the sharpest minds across politics, technology, economics, marketing, and culture. You said to build a governing agenda that reflects Black priorities and to develop the next generation of Black political leadership. We have had tons of conversations, right, around what does a Black agenda look like? How do we build the next generation of Black political leadership? We have had these conversations before, and I'm wondering, just based upon the things that you said just now, who is in charge of leading this? Because there are a group of individuals that naturally we'd say, you are in charge of leading this, but we are not seeing that happen. Who leads something like a Black Innovation Lab?
I think that's a really good question. I think it requires people. Well, I will say, when I put this op-ed out, I was surprised at how many people sent me text messages and emails saying that they wanted to be
Mm.
helpful,
Yeah.
that they had donors that they were connected to that'd be willing to invest a lot of money in pulling this thing off. So I think it is just it's got to always be a talented tenth and a coalition of the willing. I think it is who's going to write the first check,
Hmm.
right? And so it can be, a number of people, could be institutions that are already set up, like the Joint Center, for example, Brookings. Like, there's a lot of people who could have the infrastructure to execute on this, but at the end of the day, it's going to require a coalition of the willing, and for us to say, yes, we want to do this, we want to invest in ourselves. So, but I think the most encouraging thing, and I think we've all learned this lesson, if you look over the course of Black history, it only takes one person to say enough is enough, and then the floodgates open and all the possibilities arrive. And so I was really surprised at the response that I got. I think I've gotten more positive reactions to the Black Lab, Innovation Lab, than I have anything else in that op-ed, which to me says that people want to be, they recognize we've got a problem. They recognize that there's an opportunity before us. And then they also recognize that we have the power, the intellect, and the resources within our own community to really take a hold of our own future. So that's really encouraging. So I'm gonna keep my fingers crossed that more continues to come in. And it could be me one day, who knows, or
It
you
could
one
be.
day, you know
Nah.
what I mean? Us linking up, and
Yeah.
doing it together. But there's a lot of infrastructure in place to execute on it. It just requires, like, the first check, and then, the will of the people to say we want to do this.
Absolutely. Again, you get spicy in this op-ed. Another quote that really spoke out to me, you said, this is not about saving the Democratic Party. It's about building and securing Black power for Black people. But one thing you also note, right, are these notable setbacks that we have faced as a community, right? More than 400,000 Black workers are out of a job. We just saw the dismantling of the Voting Rights Act. How do you convince individuals to be ready and willing and able to build Black power while also working alongside the facts that so many don't necessarily have the time or the capacity to do so? What does that look like, maybe on a smaller level, for day-to-day individuals?
I think that's such a good question. I think first things first, which is sharing the op-ed, which
Mm,
is sharing the knowledge. We have to educate people
yeah,
that because to your point earlier, people aren't fully aware that the Democratic Party is a business.
yeah.
They're not aware that it's an $8 billion business and that we're getting crumbs. I mean, people are not fully aware of that. So the first thing, in my opinion, is that we have to educate Black people on what's actually happening and then connect it to how it's affecting their lives. You're a political person too. So part of what has to, the fine line we're walking is to not, engender more apathy, not give people an excuse to not engage. Aha, I told you they're both the
Mhm,
same kind of a dynamic, but understanding that that building, the White House, the power of the White House to affect our lives could not be more clearer than right now in this moment. And so that's, I think, is the first thing. First, we have to educate people, and I think secondarily, people have to leverage their voices to lean in on the Democratic Party on this thing. Um, Call your elected official, call the Democratic Party, raise this issue, ask what they're going to do about it, raise it on your own individual platforms. Again, elevate the op-ed as much as we possibly can. And then I think the third thing is, how do people realize their own power in this whole dynamic? It is partly, you know, every everyone's going to have an opportunity to vote come November,
mhm,
no matter where you are. So the question is, how do you leverage your own power to either withhold or advance?
mm,
Withhold until you get some concessions and then advance the ball to elect people. Kamala Harris, one of my former bosses, made an excellent point recently. She said that Black voters need to become more transactional.
mhm.
And I think what that means is that we have to make demands for our loyalty and our votes. And
Absolutely.
we've got to make them before we go to the polls. Too often, we go to the polls, we elect somebody, and then we wonder why they're not doing anything for us. Well, you never made clear on the front end what that it is that you need.
Mhm,
You weren't clear about that. We weren't clear about that. We didn't hold the line on that. And so that's what I think we have to start doing, which is, before I go and walk any precinct, as someone who wants to see Tallarico win, I need to make sure that Tallarico is clear on what we expect in return for our work and our votes. And I think that's how we can do it on an individual level. The other thing I think we can do, so that's four things. I think the other thing I think we can do on an individual level is really start to find people that are in that. We'll just stick with Texas, for example. There's 1.1 million people and Black people in Texas that are not registered that actually could vote. We keep losing Texas by 900,000 votes. So we actually, if we could get those 1.1 to the table, we could actually win these races. But what I think we need to do individually is find someone that's in that 1.1, engage those folks, find out, not to sell them on the Democratic Party, which is what we too often do,
yeah,
not talk at them about what policies have really changed their life versus which ones have not. But we need to do active listening and get back in community as Black people so
absolutely.
that we understand who our neighbor actually is, how they're being affected by the world, what are their challenges, what are their worries and their concerns, and how can we meet and address those concerns. So we've got to get back to building Black power on the ground and infrastructure on the ground by coming into community with each other. If you
Mhm,
look back to the 60s, and even before, we lived, no matter where you were in the economic scale, we lived in the same neighborhood typically, where we were always in community with each other. And one neighbor would go to college and
yeah,
teach the other how to get there, right? Like, we would lift each other up in all kinds of ways. Black elitism was much more purposeful then than it is now for
absolutely.
the whole. And so we've got to get back to that point. So this is less about, as I said, saving the Democratic Party, but how do we save each other? Because I don't know what's around the corner.
Yeah.
All this stuff we're seeing from Donald Trump, nobody expected it to happen. Although he said some of it,
Mhm.
people weren't giving him enough credit in that respect. So I don't know what's around the corner, but I know that we can't do it alone and we have to do it in community. So I would say the fifth thing is we need to get back to building, and that doesn't take a lot of effort or a lot of time.
No.
That can happen at the Pee Wee baseball game. That can happen at church. It can happen at the cookout. I mean, it can happen all. all different places, but we need to get back into community with each other so that we know what the needs are of each other, and then how do we then take that and make the demands to a Tallarico or Sherrod Brown in Ohio, pick and choose whoever the candidate is.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think, again, a lot of times people feel disconnected because they think in order to make a change, you have to be in this work, right? You have to
Yeah,
be a political strategist, you have to be someone's chief of staff to make a difference, when in reality, so much of who we've become as a people is built around, as the old people used to call them, the kitchen table conversations. It's just,
literally.
the grocery store, like you said, the T-ball games, like it's the small things that really make big changes. So as we close, this was literally such an incredible conversation, but as we come to a close, I'm curious if you had just 30 seconds to speak directly to the party as we come up until this November general election, what is one message you would want to leave them with? And likewise for Black individuals as we grow towards this election.
I think my message to the party would be pay us like you owe us. That's the
Ooh,
first thing.
that's good.
And I think my message to Black people would be to know your power, that this is a moment for us to flex,
Mhm.
to realize it, to leverage it for the interests of Black people. It is what has become clear in this year and a half time is that no one's going to come and save us. We're going to have to save ourselves. And so we've got to, again, get back in community with each other, understand our own power, and start to make demands from corporations to political parties, about what we need, what we deserve, and what we've earned in this dynamic. It's the only way we're going to survive what we're seeing coming out of the White House and out of politics these days.